cycle. And he did make it all about Gary, you're right, even though he was the one talking about it. You didn't hear Gary talking as much, which, looking back on it, especially how quiet he had been for the past however many years, the past 2 decades, it's incredible to think that he's doing all the interviews. He's doing all the talking with the press. And Gary really wasn't talking that much. Even before they went into the studio, when Eddie was doing the very minimal press he did for the best of, he was saying that if he had gotten Gary in the band earlier, he would have been the one that did those 2 songs on Best of Volume 1,
wow.
Which boggles the mind to even think about. But I think that Eddie stepped into that role. He wanted to be the focus of the band for that period of time. He had been dealing with these 2 alpha male singers for his entire career, and now it was his chance to shine both as an artist in doing anything that he wanted and as the leader of the band and show that he could lead it. He didn't need this larger-than-life front man. He just needed a guy to basically get to the microphone and sing.
Do you feel that Al wasn't so sold on Gary?
You listen to the comments he's made in the past. They've been a little bit backhanded towards Gary. No, I don't think he was sold on him, but I think he went along with it because he probably hadn't seen his brother that happy in who knows how long. I mean, that things were falling apart with Sammy for years. The debacle with Dave had just happened, and now he's got this guy that he feels like it's his soulmate. Well, all right, I don't really think he's a great fit, but
right.
It's what Ed wants.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Now, on page 136 to 137 in your book, there's a quote from Sam that is really unbelievable. It's pretty recent, too. It's from 2019. It says, "God bless Dave, but he refuses to acknowledge that Van Halen with me was even more successful than Van Halen with him, and that's very stupid of him." This was from Planet Rock. And he says, that would be like me not acknowledging what he did for the band before I joined, and that would be stupid, wouldn't it? It's incredible because I don't know how he spins this stuff because I have said this before. Van Halen 1 and 1984 combined sold more than double the Van Hagar catalog. I mean, that's the truth. How do you think he can just say that?
I think there's 2 things at play here. One is it's a lot of ego talking. And I don't think Sammy is malicious in his intent. I don't think that he has it out to just lie, but that's how a lot of people take it because he contradicts himself so much. I mean, in that very sentence, it'd be crazy for him not to acknowledge the past, but he didn't acknowledge the past.
Right.
I mean, he didn't acknowledge that time with David Lee Roth in the band by not singing that catalog and doing only a handful of songs in his entire tenure, both tenures with the band. And one of the things I did in the book that is I really hadn't seen it done to date, and I guess it's right around that same area, is really crunch the numbers of what Sammy sold and what Dave sold.
Yep.
You can't say that the band was more successful with Sammy in it with a straight face. And there's the data to back it up. Yeah, they had #1 albums. You can't take that away, that every album, every studio album they did with Sammy went to #1.
Right.
And none of Dave's did. But as far as the sales, I mean, they just aren't there. Were they successful? Oh, there's a million bands on the planet would love to have a fraction of the success they had with Sammy. But it doesn't outsell what Dave did with Van Halen.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't come close. And it's funny. I tell you, though, what I think Sam means, though, is Van Halen with Sam made more money in their time of touring and this and that because he hit them sort of on a nice crest of the wave. They were coming off 1984 and they had a lot of business opportunities which they took advantage of and made a lot of cashish. Way more than they ever made in the past, but let's be honest, tickets were way more expensive and merch and all that stuff, and everything was way more up in the numbers. But I think Van Halen made a lot of money with Sam, but in terms of record sales, like you said, and I thought you laid it out nicely in the book, that people don't even realize this, and I'm glad you did this, that in order to certify your platinum status, you got to pay to get it done. So a lot of these records are not even up to date. It's not even like super expensive on the end of the record companies to get it done. You said it's something like $350 or something. It's like a processing fee or something. But I mean, I guarantee you, like, between 1984 and Van Halen 1, they're probably nearing together, combined, close to 30 million just alone. They're probably each at almost around, like, 15 million or so at this point, for sure. And that's what's really, really shocking, is that people don't even realize that a lot of those certifications are not even updated. They're just not. They track them in the first year maybe, and that's about it. So that in and of itself is incredibly shocking. And I thought it was great that you laid that out in the book. You made no bones about that.
It's really the only way that you can gauge the success, because one of the key parts that you mentioned is the ticket sales were going up when Sammy goes into the band. The merch is becoming more of a focus. And not just merch, but look at what Van Halen's doing. What they release a live video. They release, then they do a live album and a video. I mean, their merchandising went up exponentially with Sammy. That would have happened with Dave in the band because it happened because of the time.
Right,
the times were changing.
Right.
You can't quantify what it was like with Dave touring and with Sammy touring because they're two different beasts, two different eras. It's just can't. It's impossible. Even if you try to do inflation, adjust it, you'll drive yourself mad. You could never be able to lay it out concisely.
Yeah, and in terms of, what do you think Eddie was thinking with the whole Patti Smythe situation? What the hell was that?
I don't think he was thinking. I think that it sounded like a good idea at the time for him to collaborate with someone different. Sort of the same thing he was doing with Sass Jordan for a little bit. But I think that might have been, and I really believe this, that might have been where Alex steps in and says, all right, we really can't do this.
Right,
like fans are only going to accept so much.
Right, yeah.
I think that he gets, it's a good idea in his head, and he kind of runs with it. And if nobody's there to talk him down, then you're going to have things like How Many Say I. Do a great solo album and invite all the singers you want on there. Sing us some songs yourself. Do a whole solo album and you do all the vocals. But to call it Van Halen, even though you do something like stretch the boundaries by going so keyboard heavy on 5150 and do these songs that Dave would never do, you have that core Van Halen sound. You have that core Van Halen attitude. And there's certain things that you do that are going to take away from that. Having a female singer is going to do that. Doing a song where the guitarist is on vocals is going to do that. That's not Van Halen, and people just aren't going to accept it.
What do you think of the fact that the whole announcement of Sammy Hagar joining Van Halen was clipped off the Farm Aid live on television airing? It was incredible. Like, they did rock and roll, and then they clipped it and went to commercial, and meanwhile, at the show, that's when Sam announced that he was joining Van Halen, and they played Wild Thing. Where the hell is that footage? It has never, ever surfaced.
Sammy Hagar is not catering to the audience of the Nashville network, which is what it was at the time. It was an artist that they knew was going to draw viewers, but at a certain point, they were just like, we got to cut this broadcast. Now, when they cut that feed, do they stop recording? I don't know that, because like you said, that footage, it's got to exist, right? Or at that time, do they not save things the way they do now?
That's the other thing, is that I've known people in the music industry that told me about stuff that's been thrown in the garbage because they don't want to keep it in storage. They don't want to be dealing with it. So a lot of like classic footage has just been tossed in the garbage for that particular reason.
Right.
Figuring like, oh, we're never going to use this anyway, so it's absolute garbage. And so there's that. And I also thought it was interesting in your book that you noted when they finally put out a press release regarding the situation in October of 1985 that they called Sam the singer and second guitarist. Well, do you think that was
that was really interesting?
Do you think that was the original plan and then it just got scrapped? Because after the 5150 tour, you never saw Sam pick up a guitar.
I think that was an experiment that didn't really work. At the time, it seemed like a really great idea. Like, not only do we have this guy who's a better singer, by traditional means, a better singer than our old one, but he's going to bring this new element in. he's going to be the second guitarist, which helps a lot when Eddie's messing around on keyboards. But whether it was Eddie didn't really want to share that spotlight anymore, or if his ideas weren't really going to work when you've got Eddie as the guitarist, not just in the band, but in the rock and roll world, he's the premier guitarist. You don't need that. It was superfluous at a certain point. Like, you don't need Sammy Hagar on guitar in a band when you have Eddie Van Halen in your band.
That's true. So now, you also claim in your book that the Live Right Here, Right Now live album was a political move to stave off a greatest hits. Where did you hear that whole thing? That was the first time I've heard of something like that.
That was in my research that I found that they were going to do that greatest hits just focusing on the Dave era. And Dave being involved in that was going to lobby to have his solo stuff on thing as well.
Wow.
So it was going to be Van Halen, the Roth Years, or something like that. And you would see songs like Going Crazy, Yankee Rose, Just Like Paradise on this collection. And this is what the label is presenting to Van Halen. And I think there was even a point where they said, okay, well, we won't do that. I'm thinking it was right around this greatest hits, but how about Sammy sing some of the old Van Halen songs for this compilation we're going to do? Sammy won't even sing those songs live.
I know.
He's not going to go in the studio and sing them. The label's in it to make money.
Right.
And they're starting to see the sales decline with Sammy. As good as they're doing, they're declining steadily from 5150 on.
Right.
Whereas with Dave, they're growing every album. And I'm talking about Dave and Van Halen.
Right.
And now you've got two of your artists declining.
Right.
You've got Dave's solo career declining. Van Halen's declining. Well, what do we do? Well, let's look back into the rear view where it was most successful and kind of relive that a little bit. And Ed Loeffler quickly put the kibosh on that and said, all right, look, we'll do a live album. Let's just put that out there. That's how you get Live Right Here, Right Now.
Do you think he put the kibosh on that because Ed Van Halen also was not a look-back kind of guy?
At the time, yeah, I don't think that he was, but you also had, when you brought this up earlier about Sammy bringing Ed Loeffler into the band, I think that Ed Loeffler was always going to be a Sammy guy no matter what. Did he get to be friends with the rest of Van Halen? Of course. Was he looking out for their best interests? Of course. But he always was going to have Sammy Hagar number one. And anything that was going to take away from that, he was going to dissuade the band from doing, even if it was going to make him more money, which is what something like a best of with Sammy singing Dave songs would have done. That would, for the curiosity factor alone, I would buy that record. But Ed wanted to protect his artist, not just as an investment, but as a loyal friend.
Yeah. Also, it was interesting in your book, page 156, you talk about this, I never heard this before too, where Eddie went backstage at a Nirvana concert and the band refused to let him jam with them. Where did that come from, and what do you think happened there?
He was trashed when he showed up at that show, and rumors about that have floated around for years, but it was actually confirmed by Pat Smear. It's some talk that he did. I want to say maybe it was at USC or UCLA or something, and an audience member had asked, what's a crazy story? Or yeah, he confirmed it, that he showed up trashed and was just, the last thing I would call Eddie is racist, but for him to say something like, let me just play the Mexican's guitar.
Right.
Yeah. You could see where the guys would be mortified and just blow him off in the gentlest way possible. But the stories are out there of how Eddie would get when he was on his downward slides at times. That was a really unfortunate time for him.
You never heard that Nirvana story, Dave? Really?
No, I never heard this story before. And
wow. That story has been around a while. It wasn't brand new to me.
Okay, all right.
I didn't know if that was true or not. I wanted to get, one thing I don't think I really covered, or you've heard the whole Fred Durst story where, Eddie wanted to join Limp Bizkit and then he goes up and shoots up the house. That's never really been confirmed. Like, I know that Eddie told the guy who did that Eruption in the Canyon book,
Andrew Bennett,
Fred Durst never commented about it.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. So now, why in God's name would Van Halen take a gig opening for Bon Jovi in Europe? I thought that had to be one of the worst decisions next to the milk ad. What in God's name was anybody thinking booking Van Halen as the opening act for Bon Jovi? And that wasn't even prime years Bon Jovi. This is even Bon Jovi past their prime. What do you think that was about?
Yeah, so this is what, it's 95? 95 is
95,
when we're opening, right?
Balance, yeah.
Right. I think that management convinced them to do it And from all accounts, Eddie was miserable having to do that, to open. I mean, what a step down, having to open for at that point, an ex-hair band, but a hair band nonetheless. They were just convinced that, look, you really don't have an audience in Europe like they do. You don't have an audience that is going to get you out of small venues. So if you want to get more exposure, you have to go out with this band just for a couple of dates. How they convinced them to do it, I have no idea. But it was mortifying to me as a fan, hearing the Van Halen's opening up for Bon Jovi.